Hello and welcome to today's Saratech enablement session. My name is Andrea Hall and I'm the Customer Relationship Manager at Saratech, and I will be your host today. Presenting today, we are lucky enough to have two hosts, Taylor Anderson and Tim Kelker, both from Siemens PLM, and they will introduce themselves in just a moment. They will be talking today about what's new in NX12. Our sessions run about 30 minutes each, and they are all recorded and posted to our Saratech YouTube channel. Make sure you check out the past sessions there. Twice a month, we meet right here to learn about tips, tricks, new and old features that will help you in your everyday tasks. This is an open forum, so if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please type them into the chat box or the questions box over to the right, and I will kindly interrupt the presenter and let him know your comments and questions during the session. And with that, I am going to pass it on to Taylor in just one moment.
Hey.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. Hopefully you can see what I'm sharing there. Oh, yep, there it goes. I see the audience view, and let's see if coming across. I need to push show my screen, and we should be in business.
Yep.
Okay, super. Okay, so yeah, I'm Taylor Anderson. I'm one of the NX product managers. I've been with the company for a little over 20 years and a variety of roles over the years, and I'm enjoying being in this role here where we plan what's coming next. We'll try to listen to customers, listen to what our competition's doing, look at what's happening in the industry and other trends, and come up with a cohesive plan for where we should go next. One of the things that my group specifically did this recently here was a big project consolidating the measurement commands. And we'll talk about this one here first. Tim has another really cool topic right after me, so be sure to stick around for his as well, even if mine is not as interesting. So with that, let's dive in. So if you're familiar with NX and the measurement commands in NX, historically we have had individual measurement commands for things like measuring distance or measuring angles or measuring radii or measuring body properties and things like that. We've had a large number of those that have sat on a toolbar for some time. As we looked at that, we thought there were some things we could do differently, right? So we've had, as it shows here in the center, roughly 15 different commands out there on the toolbar. Some of those even, of course, you look at like the measure distance toolbar or dialog right at the top, there's an option menu, right? That drops down to another 10 kind of variants of distances that were there. So there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of depth. You had to know which one to choose to get into, and you had to select things in the right order. And partway through, if you decided you wanted to do a different kind of measurement, you sometimes needed to start over. And so we wanted to get a cleaner, more cohesive interaction there that would allow you to really do any of those kind of measurements from one dialog and not make you back up nearly so much. Okay, so a few things we'll notice as we go through this here. I honestly have this slide and one more basically, and then we'll spend all the rest of the time in NX here as we get rolling. So you see a few notes here on the left. You'll see that as we select things going through here, that largely they're really independent of the selection sequence. We can select them in any order, we'll get the same result. Essentially, we're going to have you select some things first. We're going to tell you everything we know about those things that you've selected. And then we'll let you do some filtering of which ones you care about, which ones you want, which results you want to see as we work on that. The other interesting thing you may notice is that as a result of this, we're going to consolidate some results that would have previously required multiple features. So for instance, selecting a couple of objects, we may have the ability to show a distance between those objects and maybe an angle between those objects as well at the same time. Whereas, of course, that used to be two completely different measurement operations. You have to reselect things twice and so forth. You'll see a lot of things on screen as we go through here. And then this actually has made it really, really easy for us to add some new kinds of measurements. We're not having to design new UI for every new kind of measurement. And so it's actually really easy for us now to drop new ones into this framework. And I'll show you a couple of those new ones here today. And there's more of those coming. Okay, we did a really interesting set of usability testing on this one. We knew that this was a high traffic command, that we had a lot of people that were going to be depending on this one. And so starting early last year, we started bringing in a fresh set of eyes to look at this project. About every 2 weeks, we would bring in a fresh set of users who sometimes were new users, sometimes were older users, more experienced users, and put them in front of it without a whole lot of explanation and see if they could get things done, right? And then make some tweaks and bring in another group 2 weeks after that. And we did that, several iterations of that, to try to dial in this usability to make it pretty intuitive for people to get going. So with that, let's jump in and take a look. The things that you'll see this appear if you're picking up MPs, you'll see this in 1201 MP1 actually. And then 1202 is kind of the first major release with this particular set of functionality we're looking at. We'll be looking at 1202 today. The coming version of NX here is January 2019 that we're calling NX version 1847. If you're not aware of this, we're headed toward a 4-digit kind of identifier that we'll tell you more about in a different webinar. This one will have some more functionality. There's some new measurement capabilities. There's some new types that'll be in this particular one, and some interesting things too around particularly the display of angles. And then the subsequent release, the next one after that as well. There's another chunk of stuff we're working on for that 1872 release too. So again, this has been productive for us. We hope it's very productive for you, and I think you're going to like it here. So with that, let's jump in and switch over to NX here and get rolling. So we have a small assembly here. Just wanted to point out from the beginning, this is an assembly. We're going to be doing some measurements, not just within a part, but within the context of an assembly. This is a little air pressure gauge kind of assembly that's split open there. We've got a case and some curves, and you see a variety of types of geometry on the inside of that there, and that's on purpose so we can show you a few things. The new command, you'll see this measure, again, one button now really that fires this up. It's consolidated enough, and we think it's high traffic enough. We're finding with some of the business analytics, in business intelligence stuff we're doing, collecting data about command frequency usage. The measure is actually one of the highest frequency commands in NX, which is kind of interesting to know. We're going to put this out here on the main toolbar. The analysis toolbar where measure has always been, you'll see here again, it's consolidated quite a bit and quite a lot smaller here. The previous commands are available out there if you wanna turn those on using the customize. I've got a couple of them turned on here just for comparison purposes. You'll see them annotated with this to be retired for right now. And again, if you need to use those, you can. They're still around, but of course, we think you're going to like the new one. Measure Extreme is kind of the one that didn't quite make it into 1202. You'll see that one coming here soon. And the screen distances we've left out here as well, right? Those are little different animals and non-associative things, and so we've not consolidated those. But let's dive into this one. As we pull this up, this is the default presentation of this dialog. Again, we're going to have you select things first, right? So at the top of the dialog here, we've got objects to measure. Most of the time, you'll live in this just object selection right here. This will be all the points, faces, curves, bodies, kinds of things that you'll select to measure between. There are times when you may want to consider a set of objects together as one when you're doing measurements. You can choose an object set to be considered there. Similarly, points and point sets. These are here, the point vector CES ones are really over here for times when you need to construct a point or construct a vector out there that's not a point object that exists in the model, but an object or a point or a vector that you need to construct using existing geometry, for instance. So you can switch to those and construct those if you need to. Again, most of the time you'll live just here in the object. There'll be a list of objects, of course, that you're selecting, that you have selected down here that we can manipulate as well, and then we'll get into that. The first thing you may notice is you bring up the dialog. We haven't selected anything yet, but as you start to just mouse over objects out here, you'll start to get some immediate feedback. This is an interesting thing. So as we mouse over this curve, we see a length come up here for this particular one, for instance. Or as we mouse over this planar face, we've got an area and a perimeter that we can just look at really quickly. If that's what you're after, just a quick look at what the thing is. You don't actually even need to select it, right? Just mousing over it may give you the information you're after. If we grab a cylindrical face here, this one's got, we know a radius for this one. So we'll throw that radius out there as well, right? Some spherical face as well has that radius. This conical face has an angle, right? We know the angle for that particular face. So we can do those kinds of things just in that mouse over mode, again, before we even select anything at all, right? If we do select something, what we can do then, again, is start to tell you the properties of it. So if I select that planar face there in the middle, you'll see now this scene dialog come up that tells us the area and the perimeter and the CG. We're going to change this to centroid of that particular face out there. And we can choose now, if we want to save one of those as an associative feature, we can do that, right? So we can click the little save button here to save one or more of these as an associative feature. I'll grab all 3 of these just for fun. And if we do this, this will create an associative feature for those particular measurements. If I don't want to include the perimeter, I can leave that one off there, for instance. If I want to do that all at once, I can tell all of them to be associative, for instance, in the settings, right? And do that forevermore. But you know, if we want to do those individually, that's an option. Similarly with annotations, we can display annotations for all or none of those. I'll grab a couple of those just for fun as well. If there's geometry associated with one of these, if we want to have a point created at the centroid of the surface, for instance, or at the center of gravity of a body, as we expand that just a little bit, the geometry options and requirement options out here are a little lower traffic, and so through usability testing, customers told us that it's probably worthwhile to hide those if we're not using those all the time. But again, we could toggle on some associative geometry there for a center of gravity point if we wanted to, or a centroid point if we want to for this particular one, right? As we do that and go and go ahead and say OK, you'll see that we'll create that annotation. This particular annotation, you'll notice now, is a new style. This is using the PMI display framework here, our annotation framework in NX. So it's the same kind of object as PMI and sketch dimensions and things like that. So consolidated there using a common technology instead of the unique ones that Measurement had before. And again, this is going to show up in our model history as a face measure here, the measure feature with type face on it. And we'll see those parameters, of course, for the saved expressions down below. And if we want to, we can go back into that feature. We'll save that selection set. So really anything we could do with that selection set before, we can do now as well. So I can go back and say, I want to save that perimeter now, maybe add that to the annotation as well, just for fun. And of course, if I say OK now, we'll see that perimeter in the annotation here. And of course, we'll see that added in the expressions in the part navigator as well under that feature, right? So we're able to edit those. This one obviously is a single object that we just selected, right? So if we go in and do something similar, if we do that, well, let's do that for a body just for fun. Body has some new things that will show up there, right? As you may know, we had kind of about 4 things that we would show you before for body measurements that were really individual value kinds of things. And you could go to the information window and get a whole lot more information that was non-associative in the past, right? What we've done with this new one is really brought the rest of those results in from the information window, made all of those so that they can now be associative, which is pretty cool. So if we want to go in and save, you know, the mass and the volume, just the mass and the volume, we can. But if we want to have, again, that associative CG point, for instance, out there, we can throw that out there. If we want the principal axes saved, we can do that, grab those as well, right? Grab some subset of that that's of interest to us. If we don't want to see all of these every time, we can actually come into the preferences for the body and say, I don't want to look at the radius of gyration or the moments of inertia, for instance, or I don't really use the weight value as much as I use the mass, and use the measurement preferences there to really shrink the set of stuff that shows up on the screen for me. Save that as kind of the set that I use, for instance, and do that kind of a thing. And again, as I press OK on this, it'll save those expressions, create a couple of bits of associative geometry there that we can then look at, right? So this one has created that principal axes coordinate system there. You actually see at the CG, the little mark there now is actually a little center of gravity mark. It's that circle. It's still a point entity. You use it just like a point entity. But for the symbol that we display there, we display a CG symbol instead of just a regular point, which is kind of handy, right? So that's another single object that we're selecting there. here's another case. So here we select this cylindrical face, for instance. Again, first we'll get the face properties on that, maybe toggle between the radius and the diameter if we want to there. But if I select a second object, right, I've selected that face and I select this planar face over here, I start to get now the things that we can measure with those two objects out there in the list. So with these two faces out there, now I can start to look at things that are relative to both of those, right? So I start to see the angle between those two faces, for instance, see the minimum distance between those two. There's a little gap down in here, right? That's the gap between those two faces. And I can choose then to save one or either or both of these down there if I want to. If I'm really not interested in, say, the distance right now, I could hide that distance over here and use this result filter part of the dialog to hide one or more of the results that I'm just not interested in seeing right now, right? I could turn that one off and turn turn that one on rather, and turn the angle off. If the angles are not one that I'm interested in, I can toggle that the other way. Okay. So again, one set of objects selected here may result in more than one measurement, as we would call them in the past, right? So in this particular case, let me turn both of those back on. Let's save both of those there. And as we say, okay, here, this will create now a new measure feature that's a various in this case, right? That's got a couple of them. It's got that angle one and that distance one in there. And actually, we'll see those independently up in here too. We'll see that angle measure and that distance measure show up in the measures folder here too. Okay, so that's one with multiple objects out there. We've tried really hard to keep the easy stuff easy here. Okay. So if we go into the measure command and we're trying to do a minimum distance, for instance, we want to still make that just a two-pick operation, right? So we grab that edge, for instance, and that edge with two picks we're there, and we can see that minimum distance, and we can understand what's going on. Okay, tried very hard to keep that easy again. Projected distances are actually really easy now too. Rather than, again, going to the measure commands, measure distance command, picking the right one, making sure you're on the right option first and things like that. You know, if I come in and say I want to measure from that face to that face, for instance, and I'm looking at that and I see that measurement's not exactly straight, not exactly horizontal there, for instance, right? And I really want the projected distance between those two. Again, rather than having to cancel or go to the top and switch to a different measurement type to get the one I want, I can just keep going here, and the order doesn't matter, right? If I have a thing out there like a datum axis that can act as a vector, I can just select that datum axis object, and then with those three objects selected, again, a couple of faces and a datum axis, we'll infer from that you're trying to do a projected distance. And so we've got this minimum projected clearance now between those two faces as that measurement, right? If I want to, I can remove those selections. I can do the little green handles out here on the screen. I can right click on and say I want to remove that selection and go back to the distance there, right? If I want to construct a vector instead, I don't have that datum axis there available. I can use the kind of the default blue ones that come up here, where I could use an edge out here, for instance, to construct that vector very similarly, come up with that same answer if we want to, okay? So again, some flexibility there, lots of flexibility there to, again, help you get to your measurement faster and not make you back up, right? Not make you cancel and go out and choose a different type and have to reselect and all those kind of things. You're gonna notice that things like this are much, much faster these days, okay? There are some cool options in the projecteds now that you want to check out. In the interest of time, I probably won't go through, what the heck. I'll go through these really quickly. I think we've got a couple minutes left here before I need to give it to Tim. Let me pull up this model really quick to show you a couple of these here. So I'm going to measure between this bottom face and this top face here, the two kind of lens faces there. And here, the minimum distance you can see is coming from that point and that point. Those points are kind of important. We'll get back to those in just a second. As we do the projected here, I'm going to add this datum axis. You'll notice that the default now is this minimum projected clearance. And this really is along the direction that we've specified there, kind of the largest object that'll fit between those two selected objects in that direction, right? It's that minimum projected clearance. The default that we've had for a long time is this one at the bottom here, as we've done a projected distance in NX in the past. the usual result has been this minimum projected orthogonal, okay? And to explain what this really is, what we've historically done here is actually do the minimum distance, which really goes from those 2 points. If you'll notice, this one is the two relevant points here, the same 2 points that we had for the minimum distance, right? We take that minimum distance and then actually project that into the direction of that selected vector. So it's really been a component of that minimum distance measurement along the direction of the axis, which is not necessarily what you're after in the end, right? This minimum projected clearance, we think, is one answer for sure that we know customers really want. The new one here, actually, with NX12 is this minimum projected contact. And this is a pretty cool one. This is a new one that's a different set of points, if you'll notice, that really represents the points where these two objects would contact each other, where they would touch each other first if you move them toward each other, okay? Which is pretty cool. This is a really useful one. If you think of like a die set or a mold or something that's going to open and close along an axis, this is that first point where they're going to touch each other, okay? Which is pretty interesting. So this is a new type that's available here with NX12. One more new type that I'll show you here in the last few seconds is a thickness probe, right? This is a new one, a local thickness measurement, where we'll come in here and we'll select a body, right? Start with a solid body. That'll be our first object, and we see some solid body properties here. And then I'm going to put a point on surface here. So I don't have that point yet. I'm going to go and construct this point and turn on my point on face filter here, so I can construct a point that's right on the face of that solid. And you'll see what I get there is a thickness measurement that's a local thickness measurement, right? So from that selected point on the face, it's going in normal to that surface, that selected surface, through the body until it goes out the other side and is giving me a thickness measurement there, okay? Now that's pretty cool, but it's even cooler if I can go back and select that point, make that point active there, and say reselect new points for that out there on the surface. I can start to use that point to probe around the model, okay? And what's even more cool is that I can grab that ball and I can start dragging that around the surface if I want to, right? To start to see the thickness over the course of that body. In fact, it doesn't have to be on that face. If you remember, I just selected the body up front, so I can move around across faces, come the other direction. This one has a uniform thickness side to side out there, for instance. So that thickness probe is a new one. And again, it fits just very nicely into that same measure framework, okay? So lots and lots of basically all of the existing associative measurements are, except for the Measure Extreme right now, are in this NX12 version. I'd love for you to use this, play with this, and you'll see how this works. Again, select stuff. You'll see the list of stuff you selected. We'll show you results down below, and we think you're going to love it. It's actually a lot less clicky, and we think we'll get you the right answers faster than before. So I don't see any questions lurking in the thing there. So I think I will turn the time over to Tim, and with that, if you have any questions or comments or complaints or confessions about this one, feel free to contact me. I'd love to hear your feedback. Okay.
Absolutely.
So with that, Tim.
While you're passing that over, I just wanted to remind everyone, like you just did, that if you have any questions or comments, you can put them into the questions tab over to the right or the chat. I'm monitoring both, and I will interrupt the presenter. And then right after the session, we're going to have just a quick little 30-second survey. You can let us know how we did today at the very end of the session. And also, if you want to see more updates from NX, or if you have any other suggestions for future sessions, please put them there, because we do take your suggestions very seriously. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tim, if you'll tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Kelker. I'm the NX Assemblies product manager. Like Taylor, I've been with Siemens PLM for a little over 20 years in various positions, and like him, settled into the product management role. So if you have any questions, suggestions, or ideas for assemblies, let me know, and we can see what we can do about getting it worked into our plan. So the topic I'm going to cover today is assembly performance. Obviously, the performance of loading assemblies is a critical aspect of assemblies in general. I'm going to cover specifically a new load option that we introduced in the 1202 release, It's called minimally load lightweight display, and we did some overhaul in 12, if you haven't noticed already, of the load options, and I'll show those when we get into the demo. But in addition to the main focus, which is the minimal load, we made just changes to load in general, which is led us to the claim that an NX12 based on our testing is the fastest ever. Again, and specifically to the minimal load option that we're going to talk about, but just assemblies in general. Partial lightweight loading, we're seeing that loading in 12 is faster than loading in 11. So NX12 is our fastest version of NX as far as loading data goes. With the new minimal load options I'm going to talk to you about, we've been working on it now for a couple years. We took kind of a clean sheet of paper approach with this. We didn't want to just introduce a 10-20% improvement. We wanted to get into a 2 or 3x improvement area, and I'll go into details of what you can possibly expect with your assemblies as we go through this presentation. But if we start on the new minimal load option, things you'll notice in the demo right away with this load option is that we've changed it, and we load geometry and display it on the screen at the same time now with the minimal load option. In addition, you can interact with the load, so you're no longer sitting there waiting in an X, which is a black screen, waiting for everything to load. Geometry, you see it as it loads. Doesn't wait till the very end. Plus, you can interact with it. And again, I'll go into details of what you can do during the demo. But to make this possible, we did some re-architecting of both NX and Team Center. From an NX perspective, we took the data we wanted to load as part of minimal load, and we put it kind of at the top of the stack of the part, which has made it a lot easier to retrieve it and a lot faster. Team Center helped us out. For those of you who aren't aware, when you're loading an assembly, particularly a large assembly, 50% of your time can just be spent doing the configuration of the assembly. And so there's a new capability called Lightweight BOM, which enables and speeds up the configuration process a lot. And so we save a lot of time there. And the load now is a multi-threaded load when you're loading minimally. So with that, as you'll see in the demo, the overall time loading is significantly reduced. You can see and interact with it and get to the point where you want to do some work sooner. And just overall, the minimal load will support some use cases in workflows in NX that were a little cumbersome before. So just to give you some data, so there's 3 different data sets. We're actually going to be I'll be demoing the data set on the lower right, the ship there. But the blue columns are NX partial lightweight loading results. The orange are loading the same data, but doing it in 12. And then the gold bars on the right is with NX12 minimal. And so you can see there's a significant time savings with the minimal load approach. So let's jump into a demo here real quick. And so what I have here is, before I even kick off, I have 2 sessions of NX that are running, and both of them are pointing to the same Team Center database. The one is pulled up, and just you can see the one in the background. So we'll go with the full screen one, and you'll see we've kind of redone the load options, and we just now have a list. These first 4 are the same 4 that you get with the radio buttons that you had before, and then new is the minimal. But I'm going to leave this to partial load lightweight, and I'm going to go ahead and kick off that load, and I'll come in here, and this session, the load option is set to minimal, and I'll just leave it at that, and I'll kick that off. And so you can see in the background, it's just a traditional load that you're seeing. And in the minimal load, one of the first things you'll notice is that the structure is populated right away. Geometry starts to appear on the screen right away. If I expand in the assembly navigator, because I can interact with it, you can see, the white cells or white boxes or geometry that hasn't loaded yet. And geometry will continue to load on the screen. And you can interact. You can zoom, pan, rotate. You can obviously interact with the amp like I showed you. You can zoom in here on the area that you're interested in, and we provide some options here where you can even actually stop the load if you want. You can pause the load, and then these buttons here kind of give you the progress that that the load is still taking place. You can blank from the assembly navigator as well. So you can just pick a whole subassembly and blank it out. The data, will continue to load. You can select geometry from the screen. You can pick, entire components or bodies from the screen during the load process. And so the load is much faster overall, as you'll see here, because this load will finish here in just a little bit while the other one's still going on. But the fact that you get the data on the screen very soon and early in the load process, plus the data continues to load, and you can interact with it while it's loading, just improves the feeling of the performance being improved even more than it actually is. But if we'll minimize this here in a second because the load is almost done. You can see that you can get all the menus back because you don't expose everything because there's certain things you can't do during the load process. But if we minimize this, you can see that we're still here at 13% and the load's progressing as you would expect it. But while we're in this session here, you can see the load state. You can see all the data is loaded minimally in this case. But now that it's fully loaded, one of the questions that people have is well, what loaded? How did you get it to load so fast? And so some of the things, that I told you that helped benefit and improve the load already, but just to show you that, we didn't just load the exterior of the ship. You can see all the internals are down in here. And also we didn't just load the simplified facets. These are the actual facets, the actual sheets and solids that would be loaded during a partial lightweight load. So we didn't just make the load easy by just loading a bunch of really rough, coarse, simplified facets. Like I said, the same data that would be loaded from a sheets and solids perspective if you were to load the assembly partial lightweight. And you can see the progression of the assemblies moving along below, but it's still continuing. So in this assembly, the difference in performance is on the scale of about a little better than 2x. So then when we started on this project, like I said, a couple years ago, one of the decisions we had to make was how did we want to leave this load state? Just to show you then the other session just finished in the back. So we were able to get the other one loaded, custom sections, do a lot of talking and everything. And so again, like it's twice as fast. But so now that we have it loaded, what do we want to do? So we had a decision. We could get geometry on the screen and get the data loaded much faster than what you just saw, but we left users in a state where they couldn't do a whole lot. And so we made the decision early on that we wanted to load the data as fast as possible, but we wanted to leave users in a state where they could basically work just as if it was partial lightweight loading. So I just want to show a couple of things you can do in the minimal load state that basically just functions just like a partial lightweight state. So if we go into measure like Taylor was showing you, and I just pick here, I pick a face, and I can come in here. And even though this is all faceted data that's loaded, there's no exact geometry loaded. The smart lightweight capability is there that I can pick, either planar or cylindrical faces, and it recognizes them. I can also pick edges, be it again, whether they be linear edges or whether they be cylindrical edges. And I can also pick points, just like I could with if you had smart lightweight turned on for a regular partial lightweight load. I can pick endpoints, I can pick midpoints of edges, and I can also pick center points. So from a measure perspective, we still have the same capabilities as what we had with partial lightweight. Likewise, if I pick geometry on the screen, the system knows that this is a component that I just picked. I can find it in the tree. You can see that this component's minimally loaded, that its direct subassembly is also minimally loaded. But just like before, I can go ahead and make it the work part. And at this point, the system goes off and it's going to fully load that part just like it would in the past. It's going to change the display. It's going to focus in on this part. You'll see that it's fully loaded. It went ahead and fully loaded the subassembly as well that contained it. But now that it's fully loaded, I can interact with it. I can do everything I could do before, and so we can come in here and move face because the geometry's here, and I can interact with it. Likewise, since we made that subassembly the work part, it focuses in on that, and it grays out the rest of the assembly. But we make the top level assembly active again. Just one more thing to show you again that you can interact with this in most cases and do your general workflows in the context of an assembly like you could for the partial lightweight. If I go ahead and pick this component here, I can go up a level and it gets me to the crane itself, and I can find the crane in the assembly structure. Just like before, this crane itself is minimally loaded. Its next level subassembly is minimally loaded. But if I expand this subassembly, you can see I have the position column here. There's not enough data loaded at this point to solve the constraint system. And that's just because we don't load that just to save time. But if a user just does something simple like expands this constraints folder, we go ahead and load all that data. So now the question marks are gone. For this subassembly, it's solved. I can double pick on the angle of the crane, just like I could when the data was fully loaded or when it was partially loaded, and I can interact with this. And note, I'm not just moving it. We're solving all the constraints here because the rod is getting longer and shorter for the constraint network. And so again, we wanted to get the data loaded as fast as possible, but we also wanted to leave the user in a state where they could do their job and they weren't hindered by having to manually go load data whenever they wanted to do something. So in most cases, the user will be allowed to do their general in-context workflows. So going back to the presentation, so what does this mean to you? We've released this in 12.02 because for some of our customers, it's going to help them a lot. The performance improvement that they're going to see is going to be what you've seen here. But for others, it will not be. And so what we're asking people to do is to try it, and as we say here, your mileage may vary. And so, well, why is that? Well, let's start off by just covering the basic requirements. The first is this is in Team Center only for 12.02. As it says here, in NX, you have to have 12.02 at a minimum. Future, the next releases of NX will support it, obviously. But you need specific versions of Team Center to have the lightweight BOM capability. So 11.301 with the patch 5, and then 11.405. If you got 11.404, you're not going to have the lightweight BOM capability. So you got to have the right combinations of NX and Team Center. The load performance for minimal has been optimized for NX9 data and newer. So if you have pre-NX9 data, NX8, NX2, or whatever, those components will not participate in the minimal load, and it will slow your load down. And then, of course, since it is threading the load, you should have a processor with multiple cores, so it can spread that load out. And on the next slide, I'm going to cover some details about various assembly compositions that can impact the performance of minimal load. One of those is assemblies with a high number of component instances. So if you have the same component that occurs in the assembly multiple times, you get up into where your assembly is made up of 20, 30, 40% of instance components. The difference you're going to see between partial lightweight and minimal load is not going to be as great. We're not as efficient with that in minimal. We're working on that, and we will improve it. And of course, just a reminder here that there's obviously a lot of technical infrastructure items that can impact your performance. But speaking specifically for the assembly composition, in the assembly I showed you with the ship, basically all the components were minimally loaded, and so thus all the components could be threaded. The load could be spread across multiple cores, and obviously doing things in parallel is going to be much faster than doing things in serial. However, any component which is what we call traditionally loaded, which is not anything but minimally loaded, be it fully or partially loaded, that component has to be loaded on the main thread. So the more components you have in an assembly you're trying to load that load traditionally, they're going to be on the main thread, and your overall load performance is going to be slow. If you have a high percentage of parts that get traditionally loaded, you can get into a case where your assemblies, they load minimally they load slower than partial lightweight. But for many of your assemblies, even if they have traditionally loaded components, they'll still load faster minimally. But some things that cause components to be traditionally loaded, like I said, if they're pre-NX9 components, any subassemblies that contain overrides, be it position, suppression, or geometry overrides, what we call non-traditional components, which in this case is JT components or reference-only components, and then subassemblies with assembly level facets will also load traditionally. And then we do have some applications like CAE, which doesn't take advantage of minimal. They know that for their application they need more data than what can be loaded with minimally, and so they just override minimally and load it either partially or fully. So while some assemblies you load will have components that load partially, or will load traditionally, in many cases minimal will still be faster, but in some cases it won't be. So for those customers, we just recommend that they continue to use partial lightweight and not use minimal, and we're going to continue to improve the minimal load option and the performance, and the number of assembly characteristics that negatively impact minimal load performance is going to go down. We're going to address those in future releases. But what we ask customers to do is to try it in 12 and see how their assemblies react, and then more importantly, let us know. We have customers that are trying it now. We've learned a couple new things from them, but we can always learn more. There's only so many combinations and things that we can test internally. But please, give it a try and let us know your experience, and we can improve or help or give you some guidance on how to take advantage of minimal load in 1202. But again, the goal is load it as fast as possible, and as you saw, you can interact with it much sooner, and you can continue to work as if you were loading it partial lightweight. So we think this is going to be a big improvement for assembly users from a performance standpoint. And if you have any questions or anything, you can get with me. And like Taylor, I don't see any questions popping up. That's what I had. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim and Taylor. I really appreciate your time and coming and speaking with our customers today. I just wanted to talk real quickly about our next session on November 1st, and that is going to be about incorporating additive manufacturing into your current processes. We have David Grola and Grant Sadowski from Saratech that will be talking, so make sure that you register for that. And even if you're not able to make it to that session, just go ahead and register and we will send the recording out to you. Like always, please do not forget that we do offer, if you're ready to take it to the next level, we offer lots of other things other than just, Siemens software. We also have a wonderful services department, additive manufacturing. So if you have any questions about incorporating any of that into your companies, please let us know, because we have lots of experts at hand. And thank you all so much for attending. Make sure that you follow us on YouTube. That is where we post all of our videos, short videos, long videos, all of the above. So lots of different videos there for you to learn from. And then all of our other social media outlets as well. And again, I just want to thank you so much, Taylor and Tim, for joining us today. I hope that we can get you guys again for another couple of sessions, maybe in 2019, as we ramp up another series. And again, please stick around for just 30 seconds after we sign off here, and be sure to let us know some feedback, and if you have any suggestions for future sessions. Thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful end of your week.